And let me introduce our panel. On my immediate left, former Washington Redskin captain and player representative, Brig Owens. Let's give Brig a round of applause. To Brig's left, Nicholas Sakurai.
Sakurai.
I blew that name.
Okay.
Associate Director of the Maryland LGBT Equity Center. Then we have Kevin Blackistone, visiting professor of the Merrill College and a panelist in Around the Horn. And to Kevin's left, Dave Zirin, author, sports columnist for The Nation. And welcome to all you panelists fighting your way through the rain. And 1 month after we had to postpone the session because of snow. So there's something about the panel that creates weather. And we'll start off by starting with Brig Owens, what impact do you feel that Michael Sam's announcement had on the culture, both in the country and in the sports world?
Well, first of all, George, I want to know where the lunch is that you promised me.
After we have a wonderful selection of sandwiches, some fresh, some not.
No, I think the impact of Sam coming out, I think what it did is the first question people want to know, can he play? And I think other young men, young ladies around the country who are involved with sports are going to sit back and look and see what the results are going to be. I think the NFL handled it fairly well. I just think that the bottom line is whether or not the young man can play. That's what they look at.
Nicholas?
I've seen so many different articles. I noticed 12,000 articles just on Google News a few weeks ago about Michael Sam, and when I did Michael Sam and gay together, 9,000. And I can only imagine what it must feel like to sort of be in those shoes and have 9,000 articles out there about you being gay. Of course, he announced it himself, but I've been thinking a lot about, there's about 1,700 players in the NFL, and looking at UCLA's Williams Institute data on sexual orientation, gender identity, demographics would indicate 3.5% on average of the population is LGBT identified, which would be about 60 players in the NFL. But that didn't count when I started digging to look at, if you look at younger populations, if you look at African American populations, the numbers are higher. It's more like 4 or 5%. And just to think that just now in 2014, one person coming out, and then to see the ripple effects and the other things that have been happening with also football players on college campuses coming out has been just really incredible to sort of look from that lens as well.
And Kevin?
I think it's too early to tell. I mean, all we've dealt with is an announcement, a press conference or two. So I'm not sure yet. I mean, we have seen a couple other athletes in college come out, but that's different. Wait and see how the season plays out. Wait and see how training camp plays out. Wait to see how that plays out. One of the things, I mean, I look a lot now at media, and the one thing that kind of struck me from the Combine was how ESPN used its scroll to report on Michael Sam's showing there, because they could have done a number of different things. But what they chose to do was point out how poorly Michael Sam performed to people in front of him, as opposed to put him in the context of, like, historically how people have performed. And to me, it kind of played into whatever stereotype someone may have of a gay athlete, that he's not as strong, he's not as fast. And they did the same thing with Jadeveon Clowney, who graded out physically much better than everyone who participated, and so then they labeled him as being, or not they, but they allowed people to label him as being a freak or somehow superhuman or preternatural or something like that. So, you know, we'll see, but so far I have mixed reviews, at least in terms of how the media's covered it.
Dave?
Yeah, 2 points. First, there's a famous quote from Mark Twain where he said, "History does not repeat itself, but it does rhyme." And I think what we're getting here is Michael Sam is not Jackie Robinson, 2014 is not 1947, and yet you do have a rhyming of history, like with 1947, in which a huge portion of the American populace is getting a crash course in sociology, and you might even say sensitivity training, just through the existence of Michael Sam, just as a huge portion of white America in 1947 was forced to confront their own prejudices just because of the existence of Jackie Robinson. And of course that goes for teammates and players as well. And a lot of the things that are said about Michael Sam, they do more than rhyme. They're almost carbon copies of what people said about Jackie Robinson and the idea of an alien presence in the locker room who you have to shower with. A lot of similarities there. The second thing about Michael Sam, which makes him so important, is that to me, he's part of a mosaic over the last 2 years where I think the most profound change in sports has been about changing definitions of masculinity in men's sports and how we define masculinity. I think as recently as 2011, if we're talking about masculinity in sports, by that I really mean male athletes, you're really only talking about two things. You're talking about a heterosexual athlete who is very loud and is trying to turn themselves into a brand. Or you have a heterosexual athlete who is an evangelical Christian who's very humble, who's trying to turn himself into a brand. And those were your two. And over the last couple of years, we now have Jason Collins, Michael Sam confronting the heteronormative aspect of that. You have the concussion issue in the NFL, which challenges the idea that playing with pain is a virtue or something that culturally we should laud. And you also have players like Royce White and Brandon Marshall who are combating the idea that having real mental health issues means that you are weak. And maybe being open about your mental health issues means that you are strong.
Dave, where do you put LaShawn Jackson in that category? Where do you put him?
Well, I guess I don't put Deshaun Jackson in any of that, but I do put Mr. Richard Sherman's defense of Deshaun Jackson as something that speaks to a different kind of athletic discourse and saying, like, don't judge people just on the basis of where you're from. Don't brand people as being gang-related just because they're from a certain neighborhood. I just think a lot of the ground is shifting under the feet of people. And sorry to filibuster, but just the last point is I think that explains, like, people might have heard Boomer Esiason's jackass comments about Daniel Murphy just should have cut his wife's belly open so she could have a cesarean so he could show up for opening day. People might have heard about that. Like, I think a lot of that assholery, if you will, is a result of a kind of existential male panic about the shifting things of discourses of masculinity in sports, which Michael Sam is a part of.
And along those lines, in the 2 months that have transpired since Michael's press conference, how do you think he's responded to what's been written and what's been said? Let's start with Brig.
I think there's a tremendous amount of pressure on him, and he's really trying to focus on what he has to do, what's in front of him, is that to improve on what he did at the Combine, and also worry about what people are really thinking about him. But there's a tremendous amount of pressure. Now, this young man is, he's 20, 21 years old, and in order to make it to that next level, you're being evaluated in everything you do. You got private investigators out there, the team investigators and the league investigators, evaluating everything that you do, every step that you make. They're evaluating, investigating your parents, your friends, and where you hang out. And he's trying to say, just let me play. I just want to, show that I can play. So there's a lot of mental pressure and physical pressure on this young man.
Nicholas?
Well, I haven't read every single article of his reaction, but I think the framing of being a person of integrity, being a person who's authentic, as opposed to merely an identity label, as sort of the overarching theme, has been I think, a really strong and powerful narrative to put forth.
Kevin, your thoughts?
I mean, I don't know how much pressure's on him. I think more pressure's on the NFL. I think, Michael Sam came out and said that he's proud to be a college graduate, he's proud to be black, and he's proud to be gay. So I think he's comfortable with who he is. I think it's the NFL, not so much the players, but the people who kind of control the NFL who are the ones to watch. I mean, when you have Herm Edwards come on ESPN and say that it's Michael Sam's baggage that he brings to the locker room that's going to be his biggest problem, I step back and I say, no, it's the baggage already in the NFL, which is a problem. They have to clean out their baggage. He's fine with his. And so it's really how everyone else reacts to Michael Sam and not how Michael Sam reacts to them. He's been reacting with who he is for years, and he seems perfectly fine with it.
Dave?
Yeah, very quick story. I got a call I have a book agent. He gave me a call about a month ago, and he said, there's a rumor out there that Michael Sam is thinking about doing a book. Do you want in on this discussion? And I was like, hell yeah, it's a great story. I want in on this discussion. Got a call back from my agent, and he says, okay, Michael Sam is kiboshing this because he doesn't want any distractions, and he just wants to focus on getting through the combine and getting through the draft and making a team. And when I heard that, I was like, okay, this guy is serious. This guy's really serious, because let's be honest here. We are only talking about this because he has the prospect of being the first openly gay player in the National Football League. And whether his aspirations are just to be the best football player he can be, who happens to be gay, or his aspirations are to be a political trailblazer, and whatever his aspirations are, all respect to him, those are his decisions. But whatever those aspirations die if he does not make a team. The story ends. And so the fact that his focus is not, how do I tie this in to become Michael Sam, the brand, but is thinking more like, how do I actually make this team? That to me says that this person is as mature as a lot of the profiles seem to say he is.
Kevin, in light of Sports Illustrated doing a piece quoting 8 anonymous NFL executives saying that he's going to drop in the draft, and he wasn't that great a prospect anyway. Can you give an educated opinion on how he will wind up in the draft and what the NFL might be thinking?
Well, first of all, since you brought up that Peter King piece, I know Peter King, and he's a friend. That was a bad piece of journalism, and I would encourage everyone in here to take that as an example of not how to tackle that sort of story when, in fact, you had other publications who went out and called people and quoted them on the record. Peter King could have done the same thing. I have no idea where he's going to go in the draft. I mean, I thought Kansas was going to win the Final Four. I'm not going to predict. Clearly, he's not a first-round pick. Clearly, despite his honor as being SEC Defensive Player of the Year, he wasn't the best defensive player in the league. That was Jadeveon Clowney, and maybe even a couple others ahead of him. But he seems to have leadership qualities. He seems to be someone who a team gels around. No one expected Missouri to be as good as it was this year, and yet, due in part to his leadership, he was. But then you look at all the analytics, how much he was on the field, the difference that he made, blah, 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 blah. It suggests that he's not going to be, he won't necessarily be a high-round draft pick, but he'll certainly be a draft pick.
Nicholas, what's your thought?
I have no idea, but I did see some of that article. I actually got into a little bit of an online argument with a high school teacher of mine who was basically voicing the argument that, if he doesn't get picked, that it'll be blamed on homophobia, and that really maybe he's just not that good of a player. And my response is sort of, how can you not say that there's homophobia there already? How can you not see that these aren't already issues, right? So this was somehow, it's all about Michael Sam, which I think Michael Sam is an example, a very brave example, but only one example of many things that are happening or should be happening to transform and create a more inclusive environment for people who are LGBT in sport.
Brig, you played 12 years in the league. You played for the Cowboys, the Redskins, and you were and still are, a representative for many players. Tell me, where do you see the NFL picking him and looking at him as a potential addition to a team?
I think the potential, first of all, I want to say something. There is a lot of pressure on this young man to make it. There's pressure on him to perform. He's got the outside pressure, he's got the media pressure. And the media is not necessarily interested in how good of a football player he is. They want to teeter on the gay issue. So there is a lot of pressure on him to make it. And I think, as I said earlier, the clubs are going to scrutinize everything that he does, just like they do with everyone else. And he's got to be able to perform. If he can't play, he can't play. You know, just like there are all these other variables when they go to draft a person. You know, they say, well, you know, this guy's a great player, but he didn't go to class very often. He failed a couple classes. Another scout would say, well, when he played during the season, he never made a mistake. So you got to balance those kinds of things out. And I think they'll look at the character of Sam and the quality person, look at his leadership skills. And again, can he play? And what team is going to pick him will be based on need. Sometimes it's based on need, sometimes they make the choice of the best athlete available, and they'll find a place to play him.
Dave?
Oh, first, I have to say something as well, because this is a group of journalists. We're here talking. I have to second what Kevin said about Sports Illustrated's journalism as they discuss this. Just two things. First, the thing that Peter King did, which I think is pretty inexcusable, just remember this, is please don't offer anonymity to sources in advance of them speaking. It's like if someone wants to go off the record or speak anonymously, that's fine and good. But Peter King was very clear about the fact that when he called people, he said, I'm not going to use your name, but, and that's a pretty terrible way to approach an article like this. That's the first thing. The second thing is that there was another piece in Sports Illustrated that quoted a lot of folks. That wasn't Peter King. I forget who assembled those quotes. But the thing about that was that article, and there's a pretty good break. You could find a lot of critiques of what Sports Illustrated did online. I recommend you look at them. But what they did is they really didn't distinguish between whether they were talking to an assistant GM or like some scout with very little impact on how a team would choose, yet it made this collection of quotes look almost like a consensus in NFL front office circles, like a very homophobic consensus, which, as a lot of people have said, it's actually a very false picture that was painted by basically finding 6 or 7 people to say pretty terrible things and then just grouping them together with zero assessment of how much power any of these people actually had to affect management decisions. It's just very poorly done clickbait journalism. The question of Michael Sam, though, what's so interesting and ironic is, 8 of the last 9 SEC Defensive Players of the Year were drafted in the first round. And he won't be drafted in the first round. And he won't be drafted in the first round on merit. But it is kind of ironic that the person we're all looking at to see will the NFL pass on him and why will they pass on him is someone who is not a typical defensive player in that SEC monster defensive player mode. Based on skill, from everything I hear, he should be a 3rd or 4th round pick. Certainly teams that are big on character, but you know what? Any team that picks him, it's hard to imagine a group, I'm not saying they're homophobic, but it's hard to imagine a group of more risk-averse people than NFL general managers. And it's like, and I think one of the reasons why they're so risk-averse is that, let's be honest, no one really knows what they're doing on draft day. No one knows what they're doing. I mean, this Seattle team that just won the Super Bowl, that was rated one of the worst drafts in recent memory after a lot of those players were drafted. No one knows what they're doing. So they're trying to do 2 things. They're trying to quantify the unquantifiable, which is, are you going to be an NFL star? And they're trying to hold on to their jobs. So, and that leads to a lot of vanilla drafting. And so it's like you are, no matter objectively, you're going to put yourself out on a limb and under a microscope if you draft Michael Sam. So to agree to which, it will take someone with some courage to say, this is the best player, I want him, I don't care if it makes me look bad.
I'll just add this. I think that just from having talked to a few players and a coach or two, that I was left with the impression that if it was left to players to make a decision on Michael Sam, they wouldn't sweat it as much as coaches. Because players tell me, you know what, we're trending much younger now because this league grinds us down to a pulp in just a few years. Most of us have come from college campuses and high school campuses in recent years where we are much more familiar with people who are gay and lesbian and transgender than the people who employ us. And so for us, this isn't as big a deal as it is for them. So there's also a generational issue that is at play here, I think, at least from the people I've talked to.
Brig, let's talk about the culture inside a locker room.
But
Let's do
first
that.
of all, let me say something about this first. There are a lot of great college ball players. They're great college ball players. They can't play at the next level. They might have been great at the college level, but when you step up to that next level, the difference is night and day. And they're, look at Tebow. I mean, he couldn't throw. Great athlete, but you know what? He was a winner, And I think one of the problems they had was the fact that being able to get the right coach to work with him. He's a winner, and the younger man's probably going to be out, but there are great college ball players that are not able to make the next level, and I've seen them over the years. So anyway.
Talk about the locker room culture, which was spotlighted this past season with the Incognito Martin controversy.
Well, I think the locker room really depends on what kind of leadership you have. I played on a team, we had a lot of misfits. We were called the Over the Hill Gang. And we had a lot of misfits in that locker room. But we were a tight, very close team. George Allen pushed that family issue. I mean, we did everything together. And so it depends on leadership that you have in that room. I mean, we had a guy by the name of Dwayne Thomas who was, considered really a strange duck. But George Allen brought him to Washington, and he fit right in. We had, I think at that time, we had like 10 former player reps on our team. And those former player reps during that era, if you became a player rep, you were blackballed out of the league. I was very blessed. In fact, I was a player rep for 7 to 8 years, but had Everett Bennett Williams, who was the owner of the club, who represented unions and organized crime, so he was okay with it. Had Vince Lombardi, who had been discriminated against when he was trying to get a head coaching job, so he was a player's coach. And then George Allen, who was totally a player's coach, and the people didn't like the fact that he picked up older players and he picked up these player reps. His theory was that these player reps were leaders on their team. They were selected by their teammates to lead them and to protect them. And so he felt that he brought those guys in to the Redskins. He didn't have to worry too much about controlling behavior. And there would be times even on the field that we'd go week, 2 weeks without any mistakes on the field. Now, granted, some of these guys would come from the street to practice, but they never made any mistakes on the field of play. And so it really comes down to the quality of guys and leadership that you have in the room. I think with the Dolphins, it was a matter of leadership. No one even stepped up for him. I mean, you had the athletic trainer, the coach, that really sort of joined in on the problems there with that club.
Nicholas?
Well, I don't know. I clearly don't know that much about sport. It's not my area. But I've been thinking a lot about higher education and what this looks like in the college environment, because that's where some of these players and Michael Sam are coming from. And if I understood it correctly, the first out bisexual and gay football players in NCAA just came out in January and last month. That says a lot to me about how far behind even the college environment is in creating a space where people can be out. But what I think the positive sign is in both of those news stories, reading a lot about support from the teammates in those situations.
Kevin, you've covered a number of teams. You know the locker room culture. What do you envision?
Well, I'm going to trust the guys that I talked to, the players now, who said that this is not as big an issue for them as we in the media have made it out to be. That they are they are of another generation. But I also add to your point, I think one of the things that's important here is that this is an example of where sports is actually a laggard when it comes to social issues. We've really overblown, even with the Jackie Robinson story, which has been mythologized now, how important sports has been to social causes in this country. But here is an issue where sports has been absolutely in last place. We have moved forward in this society so much on this issue in just about every walk of life, except in sports. Yet we had the audacity as a sporting community to want to go to Sochi, Russia, and tell Putin how he should treat gay, lesbian, and transgender and bisexual people in his own country when our sports people in this country are still struggling with the issue. So I found that to be, somewhat ironic. So, but sports has just been, we've been behind the ball on this issue for any number of reasons, and so that's why I think it's going to take a little bit of time to tell how this is going to get worked out.
Dave?
The minority coaches as well.
Sure.
Way behind. So,
Well, sure. I mean, one of the big, and this is all topic, but one of the big fallacies of Title IX is what is really what it's done for women here. And you look at the hiring of, you just look at the women's basketball tournament, and the hiring of women coaching women's teams has gone down since the implementation of Title IX. It's gone up for men. I think they're almost close to 50% of the coaches now, which is, when you think about it, really ridiculous because there's no way they could get a job coaching men's sports. So.
Dave?
May I?
Yeah, go ahead, jump in.
What bringing up Russia brought up for me was that a lot of those laws that the laws that they've passed there are really predicated on this idea of gay people being essentially predatory. Right. And I think that relates back to the literal locker room question, and also this bill that was put together by this DC lobbyist right after Michael Sam came out. And the way that bill was written was to basically say, no gay people in the NFL, in these football leagues, unless you make separate facilities for them. So basically segregate, like the locker rooms and all these kinds of things. And it's just interesting to me to see that fixation. And I think it really relies on this idea of being sexually predatory just because you're gay or bisexual.
Dave?
Realizing that academia can make a study out of anything, there was a study that recently was produced. People can search it online, but be careful how you search it. That says that a heterosexual male in a locker room is far more likely to check out the naked bodies of other men and, shall we say, compare and contrast than a gay man in a locker room. Like, someone actually did this study and figured this out. And I just find it, very interesting, though, when you think about some of the sort of existential anxieties and neuroses about sharing a locker room with gay men. But, and once again, careful how you Google search that, just for what it's worth.
And that study is really interesting.
Oh, you saw that too?
Yeah, I saw that as well. And that study is really interesting because I think that it included a lot of things about how people were using information about what they saw in the locker room, outside of the locker room, in ways to, say to somebody, oh, he's got a big one or whatever, like that this was going to impress the girl, essentially. And to me, that then bridges on what does sexual harassment look like in the workplace? How does that spill into all these other areas of things that are already happening?
But the original question was about locker room and locker room culture.
Right.
And I just think what my experience both playing and covering sports just says that locker room culture is very determined on a locker room by locker room basis. So I really do think it matters, like what team drafts Michael Sam, for example. I think that's going to be a big part of this story because and I understand why players say this isn't as big a deal to us as it is to you guys in the media, but the homophobia is real. But if it's a locker room and every locker room will have homophobia. We should not expect a locker room to be a hermetically sealed environment where American society has homophobia, but the locker room is this special place where it doesn't exist, nor that we should say it's overrun with homophobia. But as far as like the culture and how accepted do people feel, how can people really feel like they can be open with their own truth, that's going to really, really depend on the team that drafts Michael Sam. So I really hope that so the story can have its own ending and not an ending that's predetermined by a level of harassment. It's really going to matter. And that's what makes the Jason Collins story so different from the Michael Sam story, because Jason Collins had a degree of, if you want to call them privileges, the privileges of being a veteran in the NBA, the privilege of being someone who was a known commodity and very highly respected, and the privilege of being a free agent. So he gets to pick his spot. He said, I'm going to Brooklyn, where my ex-teammate is the coach.
It took him 8 months to get a job.
That's true. No, that's part of the story,
And he
definitely.
wasn't deserving of a job.
That's part of the story too. But it's more just like the environment. Jason Collins did understand, though, that the environment would be critical, and he chose the best possible environment. Michael Sam does not have that luxury.
But the other thing about Jason Collins is that Jason Collins' story, I think, was misreported. I mean, you say he was a free agent. I mean, we had all these qualifiers for who Jason Collins was. That he was the first openly gay player under contract in the NBA. The fact of the matter is, he didn't identify himself or reveal himself until he was not playing. And so, to me, that's another story. That's the story of Michael Sam if he does not make a team. Yet, we in the sports media seem to be picking and choosing what sport and what athlete is going to be the standard bearer for us when it comes to this issue. Because you had Robbie Rogers, who's a professional soccer player and was very good and openly gay, and he came back to the MLS, and we in the media decided not to cover that story with the rigor that we have Michael Sam or Jason Collins. We had a championship boxer from Puerto Rico who held
Orlando
a press
Cruz.
conference, right? Who held a president said, you know what, I'm gay and everybody is cool with it. And we didn't cover that story with, even though that's pugilism. I mean, that's hand-to-hand combat. How more masculine does it get? And we chose not to cover that story. So the Jason Collins story was a very curiously reported one.
And then I would also throw down with Glenn Burke, who was a player in the late 70s in Los Angeles, credited with inventing the high five, which is no small thing. And Glenn Burke was out to his teammates. Glenn Burke talked to reporters about being out. The reporters did not want to touch the story, did not want to report the story, complicated by the fact that Glenn Burke was dating Tommy Lasorda's son, who was the manager of the team, who Tommy denied that his son was gay and wouldn't accept the fact that he was gay. So there were all of these factors to the Glenn Burke story, too, to talk about misreporting when we speak of the history that it gets forgotten.
But I should point out that the NFL and, to a lesser extent, the NBA takes it to another level. And that brings us, we've got some really thoughtful comments from all of you on how the players will react. What about ownership and coaches? And I'll start with Brig on that.
What are you trying to say?
How will the owners and the coaches respond to the availability of Michael Sam?
Well, I think, it comes right to the fact of the owners. I hate to refer to them as owners. I say they're promoters. They don't own anybody. But depends on his thought process and what he really believes behind those closed doors. He would say something out in front, but he might have another belief in the back, and he might tell that coach, we're not getting this guy. And they're going to find a way to pass him, plain and simple. And but then again, if the guy proves that he can grade out high and that he can make plays and he has the leadership skills that they say he has, they'll pick him. They'll pick him.
What's your thought, Nicholas?
Well, I'm glad to see that some people are getting some training on these issues, and I think that I don't know how things will be received and what kinds of articles we can expect to see. about all of that, but I do expect to see more training and more people receiving training on LGBT issues and on inclusion.
Kevin?
Yeah, I have no idea how owners will react. I haven't talked to any owners. All I know is we've got one here in this city who remains remarkably blind to an issue of fairness and inclusion. And so I suspect there's some others who might be the same way, except on this particular issue. Coaches are managers, and they will take the pulse of their locker room, their other coaches. Because of the cauldron of testosterone that the NFL locker room is, despite what I said about what friends of mine in the league believe of players on the whole, it's still something that's going to have to be judged. But I will say this, just thinking about the culture of the locker room, I'm just thinking about the NBA. When Magic, the reaction of a number of NBA players when Magic Johnson announced that he was HIV positive, and then you fast forward to today and you see the reaction of an NFL locker room when who was the DB with San Francisco the other year? Chris Culliver came out and said what he said, and you see that his own locker room turned on him immediately. I mean, I think that shows you how far athletes have come generationally in thinking about this issue.
But then you look at the Miami Dolphin locker room last fall, that was quite depressing, if you really want to...
That was depressing, but that was about another issue. That wasn't about this issue.
Well, let's talk about that for a moment. Let's, you had these two ball players, and you had these, a lot of stuff going back and forth, and you had a coach who didn't even know what was going on. Dave?
Well, I'd love just to say something about owners first, but that's a good example, though. Stephen Ross is the owner of the Dolphins. I'm kind of an owner watcher, which is not very fun. I mean, if you're a sports fan, you probably aren't, because that's not what we love about sports. It's often what we hate about sports. But I wrote a book called Bad Sports, How Owners Are Ruining the Games We Love, so I'm not really much of a big ownership person. But I love the owner of the Packers. Those are my favorite owners, all 200,000 of them. But what's interesting about owners is the degree to which an owner affects an NFL team varies from team to team. There are some owners who are very hands-off, some owners who can't stay out of it. But one thing about owners that I've found in the NFL is they tend to be really, really bad on racial politics. They're awful on gender politics, like unspeakably awful on gender politics. They tend to be better on politics around LGBT issues for the simple reason that many owners, and I can name half a dozen off the top of my head, either have gay siblings or gay kids. And it does affect the kind of charities they support, the kind of work that they do, and the kind of sensitivities that they have. Now, will that reflect itself in what's happening with Michael Sam? It'll be interesting to see. Who knows? Because they also tend to be a very, very conservative group. Small c conservative, not in terms of like who they vote for. They're a very conservative group, and more than anything else, what they care about is their bottom line.
Okay, questions from the audience.
But watch Dan Snyder draft Michael Sam just so he can say, oh, you don't like the Redskins' name? You must be homophobic. I mean, he's just the person who would do that.
All right, Eric, identify yourself.
Because he's a troll at his heart.
You talked about the different personalities and attitudes of the owners, the coaches, the different climates in different locker rooms. Does anyone want to go out on a limb and talk about a team or two you think would be most likely to draft this man, and a team or two you might think would be least likely to draft him? Or perhaps you don't want to answer that question.
Imagine this in my head. I thought there was an article on Outsports that was like looking at different cities and the prospects.
Yeah, they did.
Okay.
They did. That was the cities.
Okay.
And it was kind of stereotypical. Yeah.
Anybody have an answer?
Yeah, I'd
Dave
like
has
to-
raised his hand.
Yeah, I'd like to throw down with one thing. First of all, I agree with you that the outsports the stereotype, because one thing you saw was like Missouri is a terrible state for LGBT rights, yet it was the students at Missouri who formed that human line against the Westboro Baptist Church when Michael Sam showed up with the team to get a trophy. So it's like in every city, in every place, you're going to find support and you're going to find denigration. I mean, there's no hermetically sealed environment. But as far as teams, like I think a team like the Chicago Bears would be very interesting for a couple of reasons. Like the first is that their coach, Mark Trestman, was front and center on the Miami Dolphins issue, talking about issues of bullying and why he thinks it's an ineffective way to organize teams and that you have to have more of a family atmosphere. And he was very aggressive about a philosophy that spoke about locker room as support system. And that team has Brandon Marshall, who I've come to respect as much as any NFL player. I mean, he has a history of domestic violence, and he's confronted it openly by talking about the fact that he has what's it called? It's not bipolar, but a borderline personality disorder, and also being very open about issues about how we understand masculinity, and that this needs to change in a way that's very thoughtful. So, and I'm not a Bears fan. This is not me. I told you I like the Packers because of the whole communalistic thing. But I think the Bears would be a terrific team. I think it would be awful if the Dolphins drafted him because you would feel like they were doing it as a PR move in response to it. And I don't think Michael Sam, the least he's someone's PR operation, the better for him as a player.
Brig?
No, I think the clubs are going to draft based on need and not as a PR tool, because that's money they have to spend. That's money that they've counted in their budgets. So it's really going to be whether or not they can play. Now, the person who owns that club might say to that coach, we're going to take a pass on him. What kind of trades can we make to move up or move down? But it's going to take a owner of that club that's going to be the one who's going to make that decision. Again, it goes right.
New England ownership and coaching from the top would be strong enough. That's a typical example that certainly could handle such a move.
But again, it depends on where are they in the draft, what are their needs, and who's the best player available at that time.
Alex?
My name's Alex Holt. I'm actually a student in George's class. One of the things I've sort of been reading about over the past week was this incident, actually of this caterer in Brooklyn, I believe it was, who got basically is filing, I think, this lawsuit in part because apparently a lot of the Rockets were really, really nasty and used a lot of gay slurs there. And I just want to sort of get some of your thoughts on that and how that sort of, I guess, relates to the distinction between the sort of the public face that teams may put on some of these issues and how it may come out in private.
Anyone?
I got opinions about it. I shouldn't, but I don't want to bogart the
I
mic
missed
here.
that story.
Yeah, that story. No, I've seen that story. The first and foremost, it's sort of it's like you're happy when people come forward with this precisely because it can rip some of the mask off of this. Because whether you're talking about players or teams, nobody really knows anybody until you have. I mean, how many people read the tweet message exchanges between Incognito and Jonathan Martin, and you're just like, okay, so this is how grown male NFL players talk to each other over text messages. It's like those are windows into the actuality, and we get so much PR at this point that shapes how we understand these teams. But one of the things that honestly made me think about was Royce White, who now plays for the Sacramento Kings, who had all sorts of problems with the Houston Rockets because of his issues with mental health, which they knew about when they drafted him. And if you don't know about Royce White, Google him. It's a fascinating story. But what it made me think about was the team culture in Houston, which, I mean, I've had a lot of discussions with Royce, and that informs perhaps my bias here, but I felt like they manufactured a lot of the quote-unquote problems he was causing as a way to basically drive him out. And so you think about, all right, a team that would do that, would they also foster an environment where it's an open homophobic season on a caterer as well? It made me think of those connections.
Nicholas, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm a little concerned of when I think sometimes sport is treated in a bubble, in a bubble from the rest of what's happening, especially on a college campus. And thinking about Chapel Hill, I've been looking at the Northwestern players, wanting to unionize, and kind of what's happening to me. It seems like a much larger picture. I think this question of like masculinity changing is certainly like a good one to watch. But I think this question of what kind of lessons do you learn, and how are you sort of not just in a bubble but encased, really? How are you protected from having to learn certain other lessons? How can we change that? They're huge questions I don't have the answers to. But from my viewpoint, it seems that there may be a time to really think about how, especially from a higher education perspective, how does sport relate to higher education? What is its role within a university?
Hey, my name is Will. I'm in George's class as well. And you guys were talking about how teams will exercise caution when considering whether or not to draft him, and I'm just kind of wondering why. Wouldn't this be wouldn't drafting him be like an amazing PR move for any team? Like, wouldn't like an owner or a GM sort of think of themselves as like a sort of modern day like Branch Rickey? I mean, especially if he's going in like the third or fourth round. Like Maurice Clarett was taken in the third round, and he was horrible. Like, isn't that time of the draft where you're just like taking flyers on guys, and like wouldn't like this be like a? I mean, you think of like in like the last few years, like I know somebody mentioned Tim Tebow. Like they're like these players who have established themselves as like their own brand, like Tebow or like Jeremy Lin with the Knicks a couple of years ago. Like doesn't Michael Sam have sort of the opportunity to do that, and wouldn't that be like great PR for any team?
Kevin, you'd be great to start with that one.
I don't think any team's going to draft Michael Sam based on PR. I also don't like the idea of him being drafted as PR. I don't like the idea of Michael Sam kind of being commodified because of his sexuality. Tim Tebow was a national phenomena in a lot of ways, and you could track ticket sales and jersey sales and all that kind of stuff with Tim Tebow. Even though some companies have stepped up and said that they would have Michael Sam have him endorse their products, I just don't know that it's resonated quite the same way. And I don't like the idea of taking Michael Sam as a flyer, because when I think of flyers before, I think of people, and maybe this is part of the education that needs to go on, because it's not like Michael Sam has an illness. There's nothing wrong with Michael Sam. I remember when the Dallas Cowboys took Demetrius Underwood, and there was another guy at the same time, and both had real mental health issues. And so Jerry Jones also hired a psychiatrist specifically to work with them. Well, Michael Sam doesn't need, they're a sports psychologist, but Michael Sam isn't the one with whom something is wrong. It's not, you know what I mean? It's not him.
I guess what I meant by flyers, like.
There are no flyers in there.
Right.
The flyer's like the 12th round pick. Maybe. Well, 6th round, right.
Well,
now.
I just like towards the later rounds, you.
It's still a matter of money.
Well, a lot of coaches, and jump in response to this, a lot of coaches, and correct me if I'm wrong, would think of having Michael Sam on the team as a distraction. Brig?
No, he's not. Like I said, can the young men play? What's the defense that team's going to, are they a 34 team or the 4-3 team? Can he play in that scheme and perform? And does he have good character? He's just like everyone else. Behind the uniform and that helmet is a human being.
Dave? Just the stupidest thing you're going to hear in the next several weeks is that the Houston Texans should draft Johnny Manziel because he'll sell out the stadium because he's a Texas guy. It's stupid. And it's stupid because if Johnny Manziel can't play, not only will people not show up, but they'll be extra pissed at the team for drafting somebody just because he's a Texas guy. That's the way the NFL operates. Tim Tebow, for all the jersey sales, was a job killer. He was a job killer. Josh McDaniel, I mean, he lost people their jobs. So even Maurice Clarett, third-round pick, used as a dark mark against Mike Shanahan when he was pushed out of Denver. It's like, oh, he wasted a third-round pick, especially in today's NFL where these later-round picks, look what Seattle just did. I mean, stacking their roster with a lot of third, fourth, fifth-round athletes. It's like you do some wrong draft picks, your job is done. And if it's perceived that you drafted somebody because you wanted to score social media points, it'll be used against you. Michael Sam has to be able to play or someone's job will be lost, not just Michael Sam's. So there'll be nobody taking him as a flyer, nobody taking him as PR. There's just not enough of a track record for him to suggest otherwise. The difference with Jason Collins is that Jason Collins really did have a proven record as somebody who people like to play with. People liked being in a locker room with this guy.
Because he was no threat to your job if you were
You think that's
on the team.
I think it's also he's a good guy.
He had one of the most unremarkable careers
Yes.
as a big man in the history of the NBA.
Well,
certainly during his generation.
Well, I believe in a certain thing called chemistry.
And he went to
and
Stanford.
stick-to-itiveness. And moxie.
Maurice Clarett, that's a whole different story because they knew he was having issues as a freshman and the school failed on him to deal with the issues.
Nicholas?
I can't imagine a team picking him without thinking about his sexual orientation and also the media swarm that they will have to deal with. I don't know that that means he's a distraction or that you can't pick him based on can he play, but I think it is going to be a factor no matter what. I would think that would probably be pretty different potentially from maybe Jeremy Lin, just in that more people can come out pretty quickly, right? And so like attention can get diffused.
That's a great point, because I'll tell you, the shortest story in history will be the Michael Sam media obsession if one other player comes out before this draft. I mean, it would, because partly it's a function of media in that, a lot of us are like kittens with laser pointers, and the next shiny thing, we're on that. But it's also, like you said, it's the nature of the fact that this isn't about going out and recruiting gay players. It's that there are gay players there. It's just a question of whether they are public or not. And if Michael Sam gives more people confidence to be public, that aspect of the Michael Sam story will wither away with a snap of your fingers.
But
And
then
already
again, it'll depend, even though they come out, can they play? Can they win?
Exactly.
And it affects the bottom line.
Yes. Capitals jersey. Is that a Langway C or an Ovechkin C?
It's actually Ovechkin's Winter Classic jersey from a couple years ago when they were there.
That's not worth much today.
Man, taking shots at my caps. My name's Andrew. I'm a broadcast journalism major, and I can see this situation kind of playing out in two ways. Either he gets drafted, Michael Sam gets drafted, and the NFL looks very good for being an inclusive, all-inclusive, more moving forward league, or he doesn't get drafted, and the NFL looks terrible in the eyes of the media, but then that would give Michael Sam the power that Mr. Zirin was talking about to kind of choose where he would go. I was just wondering to see if the panel would weigh in on what would be the best possible solution either way.
Dave?
I'll just only jump in to say it would be horrible for the league if he wasn't drafted, because on the basis of his work in college, so in other words, on the merits, and even on the merits of his pro day, which was much improved from his combine day, so on the merits, there should be a place in this draft for him. So if he doesn't get drafted, very bad. Maybe better for him long run, for being able to choose where he goes and have that power, but in terms of the short term, for how the league looks, not good.
Anybody else have a comment about that?
Second that.
Okay. More questions? Yes, sir. Kofi.
Hi, Kofi, broadcast journalism major. With all due respect to Jason Collins, he never was really an all-star caliber player. How do you think the reaction to maybe maybe more talented gay player like maybe Carmelo Anthony caliber, a Mike Trout caliber, a Tom Brady caliber, what would you think the reaction would be different for leagues like that?
Well, those are what you call standard bearers, and we have them all the time. Hank Greenberg became a standard bearer for Jews when he was slugging home runs. How much did that change the national attitude towards Jews? I don't know. So it'd probably be more helpful to that individual player. But I know we've always talked about, what if Ray Lewis came out tomorrow and said he's gay? You'd be shocked. You'd be stunned. But would that change much of what you've read in studies about what people think? I mean, I think it's going to take more than, this is a process. It's not going to. There's no, there's no magical Negro, as was put about Obama, who I think is going to change attitudes overnight.
I'd say that the greatest myth reality of Jackie Robinson is that people don't realize that he spent the last 20 years of his life fighting his own myth. And this idea that the amount of speeches Jackie Robinson gave where he said, please don't think that just because I made it that this somehow ensured racial progress in this country. It's just not so. And it's like you have to look at how the mass of people are doing and not use the excuse of one person making it as a way to say that somehow there's been this cultural shift, and that he fought that so hard. And so similarly, it would be, I think, more than anything else, of course it would have a ricochet effect if Tom Brady said, I'm a gay man, but at the same time, Giselle might have something to say too, but the number one thing that I think it would do is that it would put a pressure on corporate America, because you're talking about people who are also standard bearers commercially. And when Billie Jean King was outed, she didn't come out by her own volition, she lost millions of dollars. Like, she was a sponsor for all these folks, they pulled away from her, and this is the 1970s, and it would be interesting to see how corporate America would respond. But as far as how people would respond, ordinary folks at this point in 2014, I think that has far more to do with what people do at the grassroots than any individual being a standard bearer in that regard.
I think when you talk about the Jackie Robinson issue, it really comes back to money. And what they saw was that the Negro Leagues were, in some situations, were drawing more audience than the white Major League Baseball was. And Jackie was a person, there were other ball players that were just as good, if not better than Jackie. But Jackie was the ball player that had been a military officer, a lot of discipline, and he was a person that they felt that he could handle the pressures of playing in the major leagues. It was his discipline as an officer. But make no mistakes about it, it was about the bottom line, whether or not they can get some black faces and butts in the seats. It's all about the bottom line.
Okay, we got time for about one or two more questions if anyone has any other thoughts or comments. If not, I want to thank the panel for a wonderful session, and let's give them all a round of applause.